there, so I remember attending the first round of her match, which was a tough match at the U.S. Open, and then I went back home, and then I was contemplating coming back, and I wanted to witness her win because I think she has such an amazing head on her shoulders and the game, and I think she has a voice and a platform.
She was just 5 years old when she first approached Maria Sharapova and asked for a picture. At that exact moment, no one could have possibly understood the significance. Not the young girl from the Philippines gripping her camera, and not the 5-time Grand Slam winner, who was simply smiling for yet another fan in a sea of many. But somewhere between that photo and a July night at Wimbledon, nearly 20 years later, something unexpected unfolded. And to truly grasp it, you have to look beyond the big headlines. Forget the full stadiums. Forget the Miami crowd, who started cheering for someone other than Jessica Pegula, even though Pegula was playing on her home court. Forget even Novak Djokovic, who took notice of the massive line forming outside a smaller court, a line he later described as a good problem to have. Go back even before Coco Gauff stood at a microphone and thanked her opponent for bringing a whole new group of fans into tennis. Go back before Billie Jean King, the woman who defeated Bobby Riggs in tennis's most legendary exhibition match, encouraged a 21-year-old from Manila to stay the course. This is the story of Alex Eala, and it begins with a poster on her bedroom wall. As a child, Eala kept a picture of Sharapova pinned above her desk. Something she since referred to as her 5th-grade project has been straightforward about it. Sharapova was her idol. At 13, she left home for Rafael Nadal's academy in Mallorca, giving up a normal teenage life for 6-hour training sessions on Spanish clay, all in pursuit of something she couldn't yet put into words. She's talked about what it meant just to watch Nadal train up close, day after day. That kind of close-up view of greatness, you just can't find it anywhere else. It changed her, but it didn't make her a household name. Not yet. For years, Eala was simply a name that tennis insiders followed in junior rankings and academy reports. She had talent, sure, but in professional sports, talent is everywhere. What's rare is a breakthrough moment. And Eala's came in the spring of 2025 in Miami, in front of a crowd that had no clue what they were about to see. Entered that tournament ranked outside the top 100. She left having taken down 3 Grand Slam champions in a row, Yelena Ostapenko, Madison Keys, and Iga Swiatek, who was the world #1 at the time, all on her way to the semi-finals. That kind of run simply doesn't happen to unranked wild cards. But it happened anyway. Jessica Pegula, a Miami native who grew up practically inside that tournament, ended up facing Eala in that semi-final. It should have been her home court, in front of her own city. Instead, Pegula has since admitted she felt like the visitor on her own court. She said the crowd was completely against her, and she remembers turning to her team during the match, confused, wondering where all those people had suddenly come from. Eala lost that match. But the loss hardly mattered, because by the time it was over, something had already changed for good. She became the first Filipina to break into the WTA Top 100 months later at the US Open. She won her first-round match, making her the first Filipina in history to ever win a Grand Slam match. 2 records in one summer, and a fanbase that didn't even exist at the start of the year was now spread across an entire country and its communities around the world. By the time the 2026 season kicked off, the crowds were no longer a surprise. They were a pattern. And that pattern had grown so large that even the most decorated player in tennis history took notice. The Australian Open, Novak Djokovic, a 24-time Grand Slam champion, was asked about the growing buzz around Eala. He didn't avoid the question. He said he'd seen it himself, the crowds, the noise, all of it. And he described it as something much bigger than just one player's popularity. He talked about entire countries discovering tennis fandom for the first time, simply because they finally had someone of their own to cheer for. Coming from someone who has spent 2 decades watching the sport's biggest moments from center court, that wasn't just a casual comment. It was an acknowledgement that something deeper was happening in women's tennis, and Eala was right at the heart of it. Then came Dubai. Pegula, the same player who'd felt like a visitor in her own city just 8 months earlier, won the tournament outright, beating Elena Rybakina in the final. It should have been her moment in the spotlight completely. But instead, during her own championship press conference, reporters kept steering the conversation back to Eala. Back to the crowds that had followed her through the draw once again. Back to the sheer size of the following she had built in less than a year on tour. Pegula, who had every reason to want the spotlight on her own victory, didn't brush the questions aside. She called Eala amazing. She talked about how Eala carries the weight of an entire nation's expectations with what she described as genuine maturity and grace, always seeming thankful rather than weighed down by it. She even said she'd like to have Eala on her own podcast to talk about it properly. That same week, Coco Gauff, after facing Eala on court, publicly thanked her for bringing a whole new audience into the sport. She acknowledged that playing in front of a crowd that loud and that one-sided isn't easy, but she chose to frame it as good for tennis, not as a threat to her own moment. Two of the most accomplished young players on tour, both essentially saying the same thing in the same week. This isn't hype. This is real, and it's bigger than any single match. But nothing that had happened so far compared to what was coming at Wimbledon in July of 2026. Eala walked onto the grass at the All England Club and in the third round, faced Iga Swiatek, the defending champion, the world number one, the same player she'd beaten in that first Miami breakthrough over a year earlier. This time there was no element of surprise. 7. Swiatek knew exactly who she was facing. It didn't make any difference. Eala won in straight sets, 7-6 in a tiebreak that stretched to 9 points, followed by 6-2, dethroning the defending Wimbledon champion in one of the most stunning upsets of the entire tournament. That win made her the first Filipino player, man or woman, to reach the round of 16 at Wimbledon in the tournament's open era. And this is where the story comes full circle in a way that almost no one could have written. Within hours, Maria Sharapova, the woman on the poster, the 5-time major champion, Eala had looked up to since she was 5 years old, clutching a camera for a photo, publicly shared her reaction. Just 2 words, what a star. Not a long message. Not a speech. 2 words from the very person whose game Eala had spent her childhood trying to copy. Take a moment to really let that sink in, because it's easy to gloss over it too quickly. This is a woman who won Wimbledon herself as a 17-year-old. She built one of the most recognizable careers in the history of women's sports. She's watched thousands of talented young players come and go without ever bothering to publicly acknowledge most of them. She didn't just notice Eala's win. She called her a star, using the same word that gets used sparingly, carefully, by people who understand exactly how much weight it carries when they choose to say it. Billie Jean King did more than just post about it. She spent time with Eala in person right after that Wimbledon win. The same Billie Jean King who defeated Bobby Riggs in 1973, in a match that became a landmark moment for gender equality in sports, said meeting Eala fresh off that historic result was a genuine pleasure. She called her an inspiration for kids not just in the Philippines, but everywhere. Then she left her with 4 words, keep going for it. From a Hall of Famer who has spent over half a century defining what it means to open doors in this sport for people who never had them opened before. That wasn't just a polite comment for a photo. That was one legend recognizing another in the making. And here's where the story refuses to stay neatly wrapped up as just a triumph, because real stories rarely do. Just days after that stunning defeat of Swiatek, Eala lost in the very next round. The round of 16 she had fought so hard to reach, she lost in 3 sets to Jasmine Paolini. The same tournament that gave her the biggest win of her career took it right back within 48 hours. It's the part highlight reels tend to skip. The thrill of beating a defending champion, and then almost immediately the sting of falling short of the quarterfinals against a player who's ranked and experienced at exactly this stage of majors. Analysts picking apart her game afterward didn't hide the truth either. Why hard statistical measures. Her serve still ranks well outside the top 50 on tour. It's a technical gap that even her biggest supporters admit needs work if she wants to turn breakthrough runs into consistent title contention. This isn't a story about a finished product. It's about a 21-year-old still being built in real time, in front of millions of viewers, with every weakness exposed right alongside every victory. Where does that actually leave her? Not at the top. Not yet. She sits in the early middle stage of a career that could still go in almost any direction, toward the lasting dominance her idol once had, or toward the much more common path of a player who shines early but never quite closes the gap between promise and trophies. But here's what sets this apart from 1,000 other promising young player stories that fade away and get forgotten. The people speaking up for her aren't casual observers. They're the sport's own royalty. A 24-time major champion who watched the crowds form with his own eyes. A world number 5 who felt like a visitor on her own home court because of the noise Eala generated. A Wimbledon champion who thanked her publicly for changing who shows up to watch tennis. And a 5-time Grand Slam winner whose poster hung on Eala's childhood wall. And now that same woman is publicly calling the kid who once asked her for a photo an actual star. That last detail is what makes this whole story land differently than ordinary sports hype. It isn't a manufactured narrative cooked up by a marketing team. It's a 5-year-old's photograph 16 years later, answered back in 2 words by the same woman who was in it. Whether Eala ever wins the Grand Slam title, her results so far suggest she's capable of chasing. Nobody can promise that. But what's